April 24, 1953. Windsor Castle. A 78-year-old man, stout, slightly stooped, a cigar nowhere in sight for once, lowers himself onto a velvet kneeling stool before a 26-year-old woman in white silk. The sword touches each shoulder. And the man who had commanded the Allied cause against Hitler becomes, at last, Sir Winston Churchill. What almost nobody in that gilt room knew, he had already turned this moment down once before. 8 years earlier, in the rubble-grey summer of 1945, King George VI had offered Churchill the exact same honor, the Most Noble Order of the Garter, England's oldest and highest chivalric distinction, dating to Edward III court at Windsor and traced in legend to a countess's dropped garter at a royal ball. Churchill said no. He had his reasons. Churchill had just lost the 1945 general election, shockingly, 3 months after VE Day, tossed out by the very public he had rallied through the Blitz. But he intended to come back. Sir Winston sounded like a retirement. A garter typically meant a quiet elevation to the Lords, and the House of Lords was not where battles were won. The Commons was his arena. He was not done. And he did come back. In 1951, at 76, Churchill returned to Downing Street, grumbling, partly deaf, occasionally brilliant, occasionally napping through cabinet meetings. His private physician, Lord Moran, kept a meticulous diary. It was not flattering. But Churchill was Prime Minister again, and the country knew it was watching something singular, a man refusing, through sheer will, to become a monument while still breathing. Then in February 1952, King George VI died. The young Princess Elizabeth had been at a safari lodge in Kenya. She had just watched a herd of elephants at dawn, when the news reached her. She flew home a queen at 25. Churchill wept openly at the king's funeral. He had served the crown through 5 monarchs. He called her his young mistress with a courtly deference that surprised people who knew him only as a bruiser. When Elizabeth offered the garter, Churchill accepted. The symmetry was almost literary, the youngest monarch in over a century pinning England's oldest chivalric honor on its oldest serving prime minister. At the investiture he wore the heavy dark blue velvet mantle, the 8-pointed silver star on his chest, and the blue satin garter buckled below his left knee, stitched in gold thread with the old Norman French oath, Honi soit que mal y pense. Evil be to him who evil thinks. He carried the title less than 2 years. In April 1955, Churchill handed Downing Street to Anthony Eden, folded himself into a waiting car outside number 10, and was gone. But consider what that blue ribbon represented: a man who had endured Gallipoli, a decade in the political wilderness, the Blitz, a crushing electoral defeat, who had refused the honor precisely to keep fighting, and who accepted it only when the fighting was, at last, genuinely done. The garter on his knee was not a reward. It was a receipt. Strip away the ceremony and what's left is a story about timing. Churchill refused the garter in 1945 not from humility. Humility was not his default setting, but from a precise reading of what the symbol would mean if accepted too early. It would have closed him. He needed it unclaimed, a thing still worth fighting toward. When he finally accepted it in 1953, the honor hadn't changed. His relationship to it had. He'd done the thing he said he'd do. The ribbon on his knee wasn't a trophy for what he'd survived. It was documentation that he'd actually finished. What strikes us isn't the knighthood, it's the refusal. Most people, handed that kind of validation after that kind of war, would take it. Churchill said no because he still had a clear sense of what he was for. He understood, maybe better than anyone, that an honor accepted before the work is done doesn't crown you. It retires you. Which leaves us with something we find genuinely hard to answer: how do you know when you're actually finished, and when you're just tired?